Hi, I want to do mostly a psychology video in in this, in this, this is mostly like a psychology video of interpretation of reality and perception and probably misperception, at least on my part. Just psychological phenomenon about physical interaction in your psychology and how things can seem intangible when it comes to interactions with psychology in the physical world. Um, because obviously this is really just circular thinking. It doesn't really get you anywhere. It's not ultimately getting to the truth. It's just another foundation, another thing that can be thought of in a certain manipulated way sense of the truth, of a misinterpretation of reality based on your misinterpretation of the facts. But that's about noticing those facts and trying to correct those mistakes and realizing that's the thing with science. It's about correcting the mistakes that you make and learning, basing a new foundation based on the new facet of facts. It's about constantly trying to renew and look for new sources of the truth, not renewing it, trying to contrive it like a religion and saying that's it. We're just going to stagnate or whatever. It's about trying to find things new and continuing experiments and looking at new evidence and the facts and looking for the truth constantly, looking for the truth based on the things that exist in reality, not using your own psychology and using that as a basis for the foundation of truth. And based on your own biases and things like that. Know the truth and live in your own fantasy world and disconnect those things. And base it on those things. Constantly look for the new truth. While instead of stagnating, oh, we have the truth. Um, well, you don't have the truth. You're stagnating, and you're saying that's the truth because we already have the answer based on a stagnating truth that we just happen to live with, based on a false foundation of a text written um, thousands of years ago that has no foundation other than itself. It's only proof of itself. The only proof of it is of itself. We obviously the objective truth is finding, continuously trying to find, and the fact that you're trying to continuously find, oh, it changes. Yet minor, generally, when this changes happen, it's minor changes. But if they're a major change, well, regardless of the change in size, it's a change getting closer to the truth, and that's exactly what we're trying to do. We're honest to the truth. We're not going to sit there and say, oh, well, if you want science to be taken seriously, you have to stagnate that and say, well, please, if it changes once, obviously, oh no, well, you're changing your religion, whatever it may be. There's a foundation there. It's like that's you need to have a foundation based on the truth, but sometimes those things that you find out are just another set of foundations based on the previous foundations. You're figuring out more, and that's generally what science is. Sometimes you make mistakes. You take a step back, and then you go forward in the other direction that you know to be more closely to the truth based on your observations of reality. Obviously, words that we rely on saying of text are not as reliable as knowing the truth and seeing it. The evidence that we see and perceive is more easily is something that's more tangible than a word. Obviously, a word cannot describe things thoroughly, other than being a word that exists as a characteristic of the function, a byproduct of this biological machine and the psychology, thinking of ideas based on the interaction and force feedback interaction mechanism between us and the environment. So words relying on that, a stagnating philosophy that's only proof of itself is itself, based on words, is the ultimate farce when it comes to believing something. You're not, why believe that when we're constantly looking at the truth, relying on the truth, looking at it, basing it on the things that we sense and see, writing things about that, but also doing it based on the things that we see and getting as close to an accurate representation of those things as much as we can. That's what we're trying to get to at least. And just because we change it doesn't mean it's not something that can be taken seriously. It's something there, and it's about understanding the truth and constantly trying to gain further knowledge. And if we make a mistake, take a step back, at least we're trying to get closer to the truth, and we're basing it on the things that actually exist in reality. Because it's a text, it's words that's trying to describe something that exists that can't be proven, other than proof of itself, which is just a book of text. While science is based on things that we can actually see and touch. I can touch the camera. I can touch you. Um, but I can look at these, take the camera apart and look at these individual pieces and see how these things work and see the function that's created by these pieces and create a function. And those are the facts that created that function based on the interaction that I had and the evidence and the facts that I interacted with the camera or whatever device, mechanical device. Everything is mechanical, and it's basing that knowledge based on the mechanical interactions that we have with the environment. Why the text just explains something that's there. That's not proof of anything. When the text is only proof of the text, and yet it's proving something that it can't prove outside of the text. While we're changing things based on what we see, and without implications, we understand, and we may theorize and hypothesize, but it's about correctly identifying those things and saying this may be the truth, but it's not necessarily the truth. We don't know yet. We're trying to figure that out, and that's what we're doing. We're looking based on we say there's a dot, and we describe the dot, and we look at the dot on the wall, and that's exactly what we're doing. We see the evidence. You see the evidence. Your interpretation doesn't mean anything. It's a clinical observation of existence, regardless of what your interpretation of it is. Regardless if you're seeing the dot in black and white and I'm seeing it in red and white, or red and green, or whatever it may be. It doesn't matter. It's a physical thing. The interaction itself exists based on our interpretation of that thing. It's an objective truth that exists regardless of our psychological interpretations, or interpretations, or our perceptions, or our abilities based on a lacking sense compared to another person, or whatever it may be. It doesn't matter. It's a sense of interaction that exists, and the fact that that thing exists a certain way, and the fact that you're sensing it a certain way, is something that exists as well. And that's what we're doing. We're making pure observations based on things that actually exist in the environment, based on the things that we've observed, based on facts, and that we've seen the facts, and we're writing those facts down, and we can later look at the things that we wrote down, even though they're just words, and point to the things that we looked at, and we can see an accurate representation and say, okay, this is what I see based on this text, and now I can go look at the thing that this thing was explaining based on words and pictures and diagrams, and look at this thing, and bulletins and pinpoints and stuff like that, and look at this thing and look for myself and see if this thing is making sense in the same way. But looking at it from a clinical point of view also helps as well. But you can look at this and see, okay, well, I can see that it's proof because obviously this text, this written thing, came from something that already existed. So then I could go back as that to the text as a reference, and I can see that it's something that actually existed. And I could see, okay, the thing that existed was written down and observed. Obviously, sometimes you could theorize, but those are theorems, and those are hypotheses. Those are the scientific methods to use to try to find a conclusion and reach a conclusion, and then see if that's the case, and then come back and see if that, and then come back and correct that, or put the check mark next to it or the X next to it. It's about proper identification, but it's a process of elimination or a process of order operations. But generally speaking, you see something, you write it down, then you can go look at the written down as a reference, which was written down, and go back and see what it was, and look for yourself and see and make corrections yourself, because it has proof in and of itself, unlike a religion which can't be proved other than self-fulfilling prophecies and things like that. Oh, it predicted the future based on this vagary that was written here. Wow, a 2,000-page book can have certain things about reality, very broad generalizations like astrology. Wow, broad generalizations are all the same. Wow, I don't mean anything. That's weird. But idiots still believe that stuff. Like it means something. I don't believe it all. Then you start talking about it like you believe it. Rooting for the home team. I don't root for the home team. I can't wait for the Yankees to win, or this team to win, or that team to win. I think it's just really obnoxious. Just be, come on. Let your emotions come out in different ways. If it's an emotional reaction, you have to say it. Oh, I have to. Come on. You don't have to say it that way. It can be said, and you can release your emotions in other ways. But regardless, yeah, back to the basic idea. I was mostly making a comparison there, but let's say that's the first part of the video, and this is the smaller second part of the video. But it's about a disconnection between physical reality and psychological reactions to this. Yeah, but the basic idea is that the sense of intangibility that we have when it comes to existing in this world. Let's make sure I see. You can only sense so much. Our sense is almost intangible. It touches, but only so much. Very mechanical. No oneness in sense. I guess this is a weird psychological phenomenon I was talking about here. There's a very vague sense of tangibility when it comes to interaction. Obviously, our brain is just an electrical, electrochemical interaction that's existing, allowing us to touch in a sense. And obviously, our hands, our feet, our limbs, our extremities are just elongations of the core function, the core organ causing these tangible interactions, but it's still just an interaction. Like obviously the atoms are not really touching each other when there's obviously a space, there's more space. We're mostly made of water. You can string us out with water. You can string out and you can see there's mostly just space between us. But there is an ultimate matter, there's an ultimate foundation that is a physical thing that can be squeezed, not squeezed, but barely interacted with. And that's the foundation of our existence, but it's very, there's no oneness in this interaction that we're experiencing. There's no sense of tangibility, oneness, interaction based on not only based on the broad disconnection between a organ that's causing these feelings, but the thing obviously is feeling based on connections to those things. It's a very strange psychological, and it's really hard unless you're really in that mindset, at least in the way I was thinking of it as. But it's a very intangible sense between yourself, the psychology of interaction, your expectations, and the things that are actually happening. Maybe it's just a sense of anxiety when you think about these things, when I think about these things, causing extreme thoughts. It may be a completely irrational thought, but it just seems like a very true thing, an irrelevant thing, but a true thing, at least when it comes to understanding more about the physics and the interaction, biological, chemical, physical interaction that happens based on a psychology and these senses, and the psychological representation of these senses and the way you view these senses and your interaction with the environment based on your perception, your projection. I mean, it ultimately comes down to that, but it's really like a very intangible, disconnected sense between your psychology and the things that are interacting, and that perception of those interactions being very vague and very disconnected, and the disconnection between the psychology and the dissatisfaction, almost like being unable to be satisfied based on these intangible connections, based on the fact that you need these connections, but they're unable to be there. But it's a perception that an impossibility that exists inside the world, as opposed to an impossibility because it's not possible, you can't think of it. An impossibility based on the fact that it's just not physically possible. Once you fit so much volume into something, you can only fit that much. You cannot fit more volume than the volume that can be carried in it. One of those kinds of interactions. Knowing it's impossible, but trying to get it, but you can't. Trying to think of reality outside the box, but you can only think inside the box because you're inside that box, and every thought is based on an interaction, based on things that exist. Abstract, like paradoxes and these weird ideas, just based on confusions and mixing of different ideas, as opposed to thinking outside the box. There's nothing outside the box. Yeah, that's just the basic point. I mean, that's really all I wanted to mention on that. It was a basic thing, so I guess it was a good idea that I went off the limb at the beginning, because it would have been a short video of really not much substance. But regardless, I mean, that's really all there is to say around that subject. Let's repeat the notes. You can only sense so much. Our sense is almost intangible. It touches, but only so much. Very mechanical. No oneness in sense. No tangibility. Very strong disconnection based on maybe expectations and anticipations. Basic psychological phenomenon. Twist the subject a little bit. In those expectations and those feelings of, I guess, maybe my own personal dissatisfaction and the way I perceive things and my inability to feel satisfied sometimes. A feeling of strong dissatisfaction, the inability to be satisfied based on a weird psychological error or misconception of what you're actually experiencing, maybe a deep depression, a psychological video, like, I don't know. But obviously knowing that you're never going to be truly satisfied, because you're a creature that lives on the fact that you need to be satisfied over and over again. Otherwise, if you're truly satisfied, you wouldn't be, there would be nothing to live for, but there's nothing to live for. You're not living unless you're constantly being satisfied. So obviously there's no way to do that game. It's one of those other kind of confusion things. How can you be constantly satisfied but still live a life that's worth living? Be satisfied without having to be just be constantly satisfied. But that wouldn't work, because that's not the way the mechanics of this game work. At least when it comes to the sentient interaction and the psychological perceptions and the physical being and the way its function is set in course. It's not possible. It doesn't exist in a different way. It's not built a different way in a different thing. there's only more or less, like I said, there's only a sliding scale. It's not going left and right. It's not a circle that's infinitely large. You just keep on cramming out the cracks, and you can keep making it larger and larger. It's an up and down slider, I guess, is a way of making just how linear the differences are. It's a matter of going up and down or left and right. It's not doing this going over, and it's not doing that. And if it is, it's doing it very linearly. It's a very irrelevant distinction. The z-axis means very little. Going in and out this way, going in and out, pulling it. Sort of like one of those things that you pull apart and you twist around and stuff. Um, it's not that, but if it is, it exists, but it only exists as a concept. It's not the way the function actually works. It works in a very one-by-one function. But regardless, that's all I need to say. If I have anything to say on the subject again, I mean the vague subject, I may have to be in a more slightly different state of mind, altered state of mind to at least define it. Maybe I just didn't realize it. Doesn't seem as profound in my head as it would, because I'm not experiencing, but I'm saying exactly what I need to say. But maybe not. We'll figure it out. Anyway, regardless, that's all I need to say on the subject. So thank you, and until next time. Bye.